Welcome again to Leading Innovation for Results. And allow me please to introduce to you the panelists of this particular webinar. And they are from New and Improved, the famous gator tamer Natalie Jenkins, Director of Organizational Development. And she is joined by another famous gator tamer, Bob Eckert, the CEO at New and Improved and co-author of More Lightning, Less Thunder.
I'm getting
Energize Innovation Team.
Of a circus, Chuck. I'm seeing the circus.
My apologies. I thought I had corrected last evening the word lightning, so it's lightening here, which means the uterus is coming down the birth canal. Apologies for that.
We're just chilling out more.
Yeah. We'd also like to welcome.
We need more chilling out, more lightening of the mood.
We'd also like to welcome our illustrious and industrious guests, and that is you. So thank you very much for being here. I'm Chuck Dimer. I'll be your moderator today. I'm the president of Brilliance Activator and owner of the Idea Loft here in Kansas City, Missouri. Just to let you know what we're attempting to do today, the original title of this workshop was the top 10 questions about leading innovation for results. The truth of the matter is we ended up with a lot more questions than 10 thanks to your input.
Yes.
And we will do our best to answer those questions and still save time for your questions and comments that are prompted by our conversation today. And while we're talking about those questions and comments, just a little information about where to place that information. If you have questions and comments, you'll see a Q&A box in the upper right portion of your screen. And what I'm going to invite you to do just now is to tell me the importance of the winter solstice to you. So if you wouldn't mind doing that in 3 words or less, what does the winter solstice, which is due tomorrow, mean to you? It's also the end of the world, so it may mean more than it usually does this year. So just take a few moments. What does the winter solstice mean to you?
I'm actually reading a book right now that's just a fiction book that's actually set around a disease that gets released from a tomb, a Mayan tomb, and it's prion-based. It's a fascinating kind of book. And like yesterday, I read the chapter. The title was 1218. 12:18:12 was the chapter of the title yesterday. It was kind of fun.
Yeah.
So if people have trouble finding that, it's it's marked as chat. It's the place where you do chat, and we really want you to just kind of do that so that you find out where that is.
Yeah, it looks like people are saying cold and dark and rainy. Short days get longer. Woohoo! Longer days. Some Mayan cocktails. Way too much snow. Days get longer. So it looks like people are finding we've got somebody that's raising their hand, it looks like to me.
So Paula,
Paula White.
Yeah, if you can type into the chat box. Because one thing we won't be able to do with as many voices as we have on, it gets really cumbersome to try to do voice on these things. We tried that, and it just it's really tough. So we're going to use the chat box for those questions.
Great. Over to you, Chuck.
Well, good. Thank you very much for doing that. I appreciate it. And the last thing in our agenda today is we are going to have some very, very special and valuable offerings for you, and they have to do with information about leading innovation for results. So I hope you stay to the end where we'll let you know how to get that information. In the meantime, we have a lot to cover today, so let's get going. I'd like to talk about the fellow that's on the screen right there. He's a friend of mine by the name of Robin Ride, and he was the former head of the UK School of Government, and he is currently the head of a leadership consultancy. in the book that's on the screen, his first book, Thought Leadership, he asks the question, what do leaders do? And he answers that by stating, and I found this very interesting, he says leaders talk. And he says talk is the single most common activity in which senior people engage, and it is their greatest tool in their toolkit. So here's my question, and it's going to be to you, Bob, and that is, if talk is at the heart of leadership, what leadership talk supports innovation?
Great. That's a great question. And, and of course I always have to think about that. Well, as a leader, we always need to listen as well, too, right? I've worked with a few leaders over the years that were inhibiting innovation because they talked their vision, but they weren't doing a lot of listening about how that was landing and that kind of thing. But, consistently, it comes to this thing that people ask us all the time as we're doing organizational development initiatives, and I know we'll talk about this in detail a little later, but, can we do this without the support of the leader? And, it's incredibly challenging, and we'll detail that in a bit. What's that look like, that support? Well, most leaders, senior-level folks or division heads or even managers that want to make a more innovative team, we have to, on a regular basis, continually put more energy into the flywheel, which has natural entropy. It'll slow down to continually support an innovation culture. So that means that we're speaking to its importance, that we're consistently behaving in the way that we talk with our own direct reports, with our employees, with our investors, that we're speaking in a language structure that supports innovation with some humility, curiosity, courage, tenacity, holding ourselves to a high degree of integrity around the behaviors that foster innovation. We need to drive those things. And then the other thing that we have to do is that the behavior must be congruent with the talk. So it's no good, and we've seen instances of this where senior leaders are saying that they want more innovation, are pushing the idea that the organization must be more innovative, but the employees or their direct reports kind of throw the penalty flag that that's a little bit of kind of BS-y stuff. And the reason they're throwing the penalty flag is because the talk is not aligned with that leader's behavior. So, but we all know that to satisfy the analysts, to satisfy our investors, we need to portray ourselves as an organization that's going to continually evolve and improve and develop, to be more new and improved over time, as one might say. So,
hey, Bob, that raises an interesting question. You're saying we have to keep acting in a way that fosters this. What if an organization is already a model of innovation? Can that organization continue to improve?
So, Natalie, what's your thought on that?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think it's, innovation, it's sort of like the laundry. You always have to be working at it to keep caught up on it, so, or it can pile up in a bad direction. Nothing getting done and just a bunch of dirty laundry. So, yeah, I think every organization needs to work at it, and I think the reason we're getting so much interest for these types of webinars that we're having right now is organizations are getting to that point where they know they need to put more systems and structures in place to make it more sustainable because, we have peaks and valleys of our innovation efforts, and organizations are starting to say that's not good enough. And even these brilliant examples of some breakthrough innovation companies have to work at it, and they can get worse and they can get better. But you can always strengthen what you're doing around innovation efforts, but it takes a lot of thought and effort and systems and structures to help really sustain that for the long haul.
So Natalie, I hear you saying any organization can be an innovative organization, and even those that are models of innovation can become more innovative. Is that right?
No,
that's
never.
That's what I think, yeah.
They're perfect. Apple, that's it. They never have to improve. They have reached it. And it's kind of funny that way, is that there'll be certain organizations that will become the poster children, if you will, for creativity and innovation at a given time in a culture. And the danger always becomes that they start drinking that Kool-Aid themselves. They start believing that that's the case, that they really do have that. And in the business literature, Harvard Business Review articles, consulting firm white papers are littered with stories of organizations that at some point in their history started to be a bit arrogant, and because they were doing well, and deservedly they felt good about what they had done that got them to that point, and it always was some degree of innovation that brings them there. And so they start to get pretty happy with it. One example that we've seen recently, Toyota, as you go back, I don't know, 6-7 years or so ago, I don't have the exact dates, but they really were the market leader in the automotive category in so many ways. All the automotive magazines were touting their brilliance and all of that. And then I think it was 2005, 2006, somewhere in that range, they started to have a huge number of recalls across a tremendous number of models. What happened? Well, the CEO at Hyundai talked about that. Of course, he knows more about what happened at Toyota than I do because he watches them a lot. And he said what really caught up with them was their own, kind of arrogance, and that they need to continually be vigilant. And we are going to constantly try to do that at Hyundai. And sure enough, Hyundai started to take some share and getting a better reputation, these kinds of things. So it's not that what happens without attention to this is entropy. The metaphor I think oftentimes of is, a flywheel, and all flywheels experience friction, and over time that friction will slow them down unless you put new energy into it. And so is the case with organizational growth, change, innovation, good creative problem solving. So I need to do it all the time. We have a company, and I can't say the name, but that is, you guys, if you did a list of, if the group brainstormed a list of, we should do that. Real quick, everybody over on your, in your chat box, put down some of the names of the companies that you think kind of tend to be poster children for innovation, that kind of really speak to that, so that we can kind of see what that looks like, and maybe read some of those back, whoever can see the amount of it. But what are some of those companies? And I'm not going to say when you put the one on there, that's the one I'm speaking of, but it'll be in your list. So if people go ahead, get engaged, put that on there. Are we getting some of those names in there?
We are. We've got Apple, we've got Google, 3M, Toyota, Google, Disney, Pixar, HP, Gillette. That's what we've got.
That's what you got so far, and
I was
right.
Yeah.
One of those companies that, one I'm going to tell about is listed in there. So we get a call not long ago from somebody newly transferred into that company from another, who had been working at an entirely different industry. He sends me an email, and the quote is something like, this company needs help. Its innovation engine is beginning to fail, and they're only now beginning to recognize it, even though most of us believe that they're very innovative. Because what we're seeing now is the product of innovation over the last few years. That's what we see in the market. That's our experience of the company. But what are we going to see 2 or 3 years from now if their innovation engine starts to falter? And so, you need to constantly be working on improving, and you'll gain it in the sector.
Yeah, added to that list was MIT and Verizon. And I think it was interesting that Verizon was added because recently at the back end of Innovation Conference, there was somebody from Verizon that was there speaking, and he said, what we sell today, what we do as a company today is not going to be there in the future. We have to reinvent ourselves to survive. We've got to think about what value we're going to bring to the market, because people can go and make calls without using a provider like Verizon. So, that's an example of, yeah, go ahead.
Remember the woman we chatted with from Southwest, who essentially said, we've got a great reputation for innovation, but she's being very serious about constantly promoting improvement of that. and she's realizing that they do an incredible job of training their people and supporting their people to be creative, but they have not done such a good job of figuring out how to promote creative ideas that somebody might find individually that are really great across the enterprise. And so she's thinking about ways that they can do that. So there you go. That's a company that's, with that kind of thinking, that's putting continuous new energy into their flywheel of innovation.
Hey, Bob, you were talking a little earlier about Toyota, and one of the things certainly 10 years ago that they were famous for was the Toyota manufacturing method, from which Six Sigma and Lean have emerged. It's interesting that had nothing to do necessarily with products and service. And so could you talk a little bit about innovation going beyond products and service? Because I think too often the business press hones in on things such as Apple's iPad or Zappos customer service, but there's more to innovation than that, isn't there?
Yeah, there really is. Yesterday I was working with the senior leadership at a technology company on the East Coast, planning their innovation strategy, from a large perspective, systematically. And one of the senior executives, the VP of HR, said, yeah, he said, I was recently talking to somebody about we're going to roll this out, and it's really going to be an important, permanent part of our culture. And she said, but I'm not part of new products. What's innovation mean for me? And, it's fascinating to me that these days, the way that we talk about this all is we group it under the area of innovation. And, I wonder if that word will stick or if we'll use it in another way. But at the base of all innovation is a skill set of creative thinking and creative problem solving. Now, find me a job where you don't have to solve problems. And I don't care if you're standing there putting widgets on an assembly line. You've got a problem to solve, and that's your own boredom and your ability to stay focused on the task so that you don't introduce variance into the task. So you personally have to get creative about how you're going to get yourself through that day. I worked on an assembly line when I was younger, bottling soap in gallons, thousands of them in a day. And you have to get creative to solve that. So another instance we worked in that just was a really elegant thing was a group of people that were senior administrative assistants in an auditing unit. And the auditing unit was not doing well in terms of their organizational culture, and it was impeding the quality of their audits, and all kinds of things were going on. And they got their heads together and figured out how to turn around the quality of the individual culture in that organization, which then impacted their ability to go out and do their audits more elegantly. And this was in a pharmaceutical company, and these were the auditors that regulated the auditors. So that company had auditors that audited the auditors. And so then that had an impact. The quality of their work improves the auditors. That improves the quality of their clinical research. That improves the quality of the drugs that are coming out of their assembly line, blah, 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 blah. Because 3 administrative assistants got together and said, we've got to fix the problem in this business unit that we have. And they had to be pretty creative about how to do it. So, it's problem solving. We do it every day. And some of us solve problems elegantly, and some of us solve problems kind of not so elegantly. And I do both, by the way. And what I'm striving to do personally is to solve problems elegantly more frequently. And as a business leader, I'm trying to do the same. And every company and every organization, whether you're an NGO or if Felix is on, a Catholic priest in Nigeria, there are problems that we have to solve. And whether we do them, well or poorly, it has to do with our innovation or creativity skills.
Natalie, can I ask you a question? It's really closely related to this. And before I ask you that, Bob, I got to say that working in a soap factory at least was clean work. Bob has been saying that innovation in a lot of senses is just good problem solving. So is the term innovation culture merely a fancy term for good management?
Well, I don't think so, because I think it's the attention. You can have good management and innovation, be absent. You can be managing to objectives, and innovation, could be stymied in the organization. And, you can have good management and the company still fail. And, I think that's the distinction is we're at that time where innovation culture needs to really be looked after, cared for, and vetted in a way that most organizations hadn't done in the past, didn't need to do in the past as much, because now this pressure, this rate of change, the ability to think through situation as Bob was just talking about, and when he was just talking about what, being creative problem solving everywhere within the organization, I thought, that's really the difference for right now on what a human can do as compared to what a machine can do. And we're finding more and more jobs being automated and technology taking over, routine types of things. That ability to sit in an organization and say, I just do what people tell me to do, those jobs are going to disappear, because that's something you can write a program for, or technology can automate. So I think innovation culture is its own thing. It's part of good management and leadership practices today, but I do think it's a separate issue.
Thanks, Natalie. And Bob, how would you describe innovative culture? What sorts of attitudes, processes, elements, et cetera, need to be present?
There's like so many levels that you can, come at that question. But, primarily in an innovation culture, people are taking responsibility to improve things, whatever it might be, across the board. So there's that high degree of responsibility taking, and they're improving things. So if I start there, if that's my intention, and that's the intention of most of the people in the workforce, then there are certain things that can assist me to do that well. Just because I want to be good at improving things doesn't mean I will. So what makes us more likely to want to improve things? First off, I need to be humble enough, and the organization needs to be humble enough to know that it's not perfect, nor am I as a manager, nor am I as a senior vice president. I'm constantly working to improve. So then if that's the case, the minute that I have that humility, what naturally flows from that is a high degree of curiosity. We don't like seeing ourselves as less than. It seems we're kind of built or evolved in a way that the species generally, when well fed and not in huge danger, if you're high enough on Maslow's hierarchy, you want to improve. And so, but it's hard to improve in a vacuum. So you get curious. You want to learn new things, connect new things, find out from other people. What have others done in the past? And these kinds of attitudes then drive processes that cause people to embed good learning practices, good connectivity into their organization. So, at Johnson & Johnson, for instance, on a regular basis, so that they continually drive innovation, they bring together many of the people around their operating companies that are involved in oncology research. And they do some poster sessions where they can all learn what the others are doing. And then they do some creative thinking together about where they might go forward or not go forward in their continued development and research. Those kinds of processes drive the overall long-term innovation culture. But you've also got to have things like, your employee accountability system. If you're doing a management by objective stuff, well, then you need to have some objectives around behaviors and things like that will help to drive a culture that sustains us over the long haul.
I'm finding this interesting. Natalie, Bob just said that in an innovative culture, people take responsibility to change things. It's the intention of most of the people in the workforce to change things positively. So here's a question I think that kind of flows from that, and that is, why are we talking about innovative leadership? If we're all creative, if that's where we are, if we're on the top of Maslow's hierarchy, then shouldn't innovative culture basically self-actualize? Shouldn't it just be a natural event in a healthy organization?
I say things like, in the fantasy land of everything goes perfectly, magically, mystically happens, then that would, happen. But the reality is we need some good leadership around driving change and driving the type of culture that we need as an innovative organization. So it's you know, there's responsibilities. There's formal leadership and there's informal leadership, and you need both to be successful. And that's why, you know, what Bob was talking about really getting the systems in place. But you've got to have leaders that, you know, that are held accountable and in a different way, formally, within the organization. And you see that throughout, you know, your life in different situations where, yeah, you can have people that are leaders, informal leaders, and they do some great work and inspire people. But unless you have people that are really dedicated to leading the effort, then not a whole lot of momentum is sustainable over time.
Well, thanks for that. There was a business strategist by the name of Scott Anthony, and he says that a leader can paint a vision of an innovative culture and then tell the staff to follow that vision and then sit back and wait for it to happen. Or that leader can lean forward and help to cultivate the vision and make it real. So this question is to both Bob and Natalie. It's what can leaders do that would help cultivate an innovative culture, besides the talk, the leadership talk that we talked about earlier?
You know, I would say that leaning back is not going to cut it. You know, I have to be that, you know, to steal the Gandhi quote. I need to be the change I wish to see in my organization. He said to the world, but if we paraphrase it. And so I'm thinking of a CEO of a biotechnology company that I've been working with now for the last 6 months. And what this guy, after I met him and chatted with him for a while when he was vetting us to see if we were qualified, I characterized him to our partners. I said, this guy's a player. And what I mean by that is he is reading in this space. He knows what's going on in this space. He's educating himself in this space. And then as I watched the guy, I facilitated a bit of a training I did with their senior leadership group and then some strategy work, and watched the way that he played. He was essentially, and rightfully so, demanding of his folks that, look, we are going to figure out how to make this company. We've done well on the product that got us to where we are, products, in fact, but that we're going to have to continue to grow. We had a great breakthrough on an initial product in the science, and now we've got to leverage that and move forward. And so you'd see him doing things. There were, you know, not everybody in his executive team was fully aligned with this vision of, you know, we've got to have a more innovative culture, you know. And so what he was doing was putting the direct accountabilities on that group in terms of, this is what I am going to hold you accountable to in terms of both your leadership, your behavior change, the systems you're going to put in place. At one point during the training, as an example, I was talking with them about, you know, a lot of companies are choosing to put internal venture capital systems into their organization. And as a way for folks that have a great idea, but their management might be stifling it, to get some experimental money to move things forward. And so he interrupts me. He right in the middle of this thing, he turns to his CFO, and he says to the CFO, here's the deal. He says, this quarter, I want you to establish a fund inside the company that is specifically a venture capital fund, and I want you to build a governance group around that venture capital fund. And then, wisely, he turns to his VP of HR, and he says, I can imagine that some mid-managers might inhibit people just going directly to that venture capital with an idea that they have to grow or improve the business, and that they're not going to want that to happen unless they vet it. If you find out that anybody's doing that, I want you to build a system that in their performance appraisals that would find out if they were doing anything to inhibit their employees' access to that venture capital fund. You know, that's the level of play. The guy is thinking about what it is that we're going to do that that really cultivates it. And he knows, in truth, I think any leader in an organization, so I think, you know, work a lot at the top, so I tend to think that way. But anybody that, in anywhere in the organization, so for instance, I'm working with a guy last week who's a VP in an IT group. And I'd say he's probably C-3 or 4. And he decided he wanted to make his entire IT organization more innovative than it currently is. And he's put together a really sophisticated strategy to drive that. Now, he's got support of the people above him, which he had to be sophisticated to get, and he had to take some risk to get. You know, he got some lukewarm support on one idea that he wanted to fund, you know, from somebody a few steps above him. But he got the support, but it was lukewarm. So, you know, he's taken some risks to implement the strategy. Fortunately, already they're seeing some ROI on it, and so good for him for taking the risk. But it was nonetheless a risk. So that's the game. And there's knowledge here about what to do. It's not, you know, you have to make it all up. There's great best practices. There's 60 years of research around this. And, you know, we've been doing it 20 years, and we've learned some things about what works and what doesn't, you know. And so you got to start going that path.
It strikes me, Bob, that there's one big issue here, and I'm going to ask Natalie to address that. And that issue is, you know, there are a lot of demands on leaders, and those demands are increasing. They're not going away. Margins are being squeezed. Budgets are being cut. Where does a leader find the time and the money to do more innovation?
Well, I mean, you know, that's why building the culture of innovation and making it a part of the way people work on a daily basis, on the way that they're solving problems, on the way they're scanning for opportunities, it becomes the way in which work gets done. Innovation is a part of that on a daily basis. And in addition to that, there does need to be some focus on, you know, what their goals and strategies are around products, offerings, services, and also efficiencies within the organization. And so there's some initial investments in making sure people have the skills, you've got the right processes in place. You know, one of the things that Bob and I have put together recently that seems to be working really well for people, you know, we've taken all this research, you know, the 60 years worth of research, and we've boiled it down into 12 areas that organizations really need to be focusing on to drive this culture of innovation. And so with that, there's some upfront costs and making sure you've got some systems in place. But once it becomes embedded, then the surprising thing is that it becomes a part of the everyday work. You know, it's not something that people carve off and say, okay, now I'm going to be innovative now. There might be some strategies around that, around products and services, you know, as an additional driver in that area. But in the other, you know, daily work, it's just going to be embedded into the culture. And so it's not always that there's additional time or money on everything that's happening. But there needs to be some strategy things where people do have to take some risk, financial risk, as they're going forward. But they should be looking at it strategically.
You know, when I hear you talking about 12 drivers of innovation, Natalie, you know, I get the impression that a staff is going to greet that with this type of look in their face. And so my question, and Bob, if you would handle this, is what does a leader do that can sustain buy-in for more innovation? You know, not get the buy-in and then sustain it.
You know, the tart way to say it is you create pain and pleasure. So, you know, obviously it's great to have people see the logic of this and, you know, cause training to happen and that kind of thing so that people see the logic of it. You know, I still run into curmudgeons that think, you know, this stuff's flavor of the month. And, you know, it's like, okay, go ahead and keep thinking that, but you're not going to be here for that long, one way or the other. You know, so one clear one is that as a leader, I need to put in accountability and metrics inside my system. I need to make people accountably and visibly responsible for making the change wherever I happen to be. So that's one. The second is I must continuously, over and over, say the message that this is important and, as I've said earlier, behave that way. Sometimes when I'm working with high potentials, kind of in a senior level in the organization, who aspire to very high leadership positions, potentially to own a company, be the chief executive officer of a company, I'll say to them, look, part of your deal is you're going to have to learn how to tell stories, and you're going to have to get comfortable telling the same story over and over and over again with very subtle changes, because that's what's required to keep these kind of things, you know, front and center in our minds. So it's this is the year of innovation. you can't be pulling that off. This might be the year where we attend to it really intensively, or this might be the year of building a sustainable innovation culture. But from then on, we're doing maintenance work on that thing and improving it and shifting things around. So it's that constant noise. So that's one. And then you're going to need to understand that your human resource is the real value here. There'll be systems and stuff you put into place. Natalie, the sheet that Natalie was talking about, that 12-point thing, that details some of that, and we'll make sure people can get it if they want it. But the thing that you're going to need to do is support and continue to train your people to improve in this skill set. And it's a learnable skill set. It's not, and it's a wonderful skill set in terms of having, because not only do you get to use it, you know, at work, but if you learn it at work, you can use it anywhere. So you build that skill set into your folks.
Hey, Bob, I wonder, and Chuck, if we should ask a question. You know, you said something about building a system of pain and pleasure. I wonder if anybody on the call today, if you could use the chat window and give us any examples from your organization of where maybe either pain or pleasure has been used in some way to help drive innovation.
Yeah. That would be interesting to hear. You know, you and I have certainly, all three of us have good examples of that, but it would be fun to hear some from those.
While we're waiting for those to appear, Bob, you know, I get this sense that even if a leader is an exquisite storyteller and convinces people that innovation needs to be done, there still lurks in the background this tremendous fear. And the fear that haunts people is, if I come up with an idea that I think is really creative, and if it fails, I'm going to lose my head. And there aren't going to be angels around to support me when it happens. And, you know, if we'd like a recent example of that, how about the shake-up at Apple over their Maps application? You know, heads rolled on that one.
Yeah, and that will continue to happen from time to time. So how do you, those are big failures, right? And, you know, New Coke, you know, from, you know, our youth, you know, when they made that mistake. So the general thing here that most are striving to move towards is that to minimize risk, what you do is you try small prototypic experiments rapidly. So the little cute way of saying it is try fast, fail fast. And so what we tend to try to do is to build in a culture of small experimentation. So for instance, this idea of a venture capital fund that we were playing around with. When most people come to the VC fund inside of an organization with an idea, they're not coming with a multi-million-dollar request. They're coming with a request in the hundreds and thousands, hundreds, you know, 2 zeros or 3 zeros kinds of level of request. Because what they're wanting to do is proof of concept. They're wanting to change a thing and move that forward in a prototypic way and see what's gonna follow. So that's one. The other is that and companies do this, and I'm not 100% sure, maybe somebody in the audience would know if this is the right case story, but I believe it's Colgate, who we have not worked with, even though my dad was the Midwest Regional VP for sales for Colgate back in the day when he was younger. But we haven't really done direct work with them. But one story I heard, I believe from one of their folks that I interviewed at a conference one time, was that they actually give out an award for the most interesting failure. And a real award, and an honoring award, not like we're going to zing you for this failure. But what makes it the most interesting failure? Well, what did we learn? Did we learn some cool stuff from that that's useful for us to know? And so you start to do things like that. You know, the truth is that when you have these big giant failures, it's very difficult for us to build systems that don't create some kind of consequence for people around that. Very difficult. I would strive for that. I don't have great formulae to tell a person exactly how you do that. So you make a New Coke kind of mistake, or you're the one that runs the manufacturing line that introduced all of the defects that caused us to have to recall our automotive models. Well, what's going on there? Now, another way to think about that is that if we've managed to build a culture where people feel a high degree of responsibility to improve the culture, then instead of seeing something that's not going right and, kind of mentally turfing that to someone else will get in trouble, not me, those cultures have more of a tendency to say, oh, wait a minute, there's something going on here and we need to do something about it. And when that, when not a person is responsible, but we are all individually experiencing ourselves as responsible, then you're making that right movement. So I'll ask the question when I'm training classes, towards the end of a class sometimes I'll say, so who in this class is responsible for making sure this organization becomes a more innovative organization? And the answer I'm looking for, and usually by the end of the course they know that and they'll comply, they'll say, not we all are, not say us. They each individually in unison say, I am. Not from an egotistical point of view, but from a point of view of, yeah, and so are you guys, but I'm going to focus on me because that's the one I've got the most control over. And in the aggregate, I expect you all to do the same, and then we'll make a big difference. I think all of that aggregates to minimizing risk.
Thanks, Bob. Natalie, a question to you is, who do you think should be trained and what should they be trained in to drive innovation?
Well, it depends, of course. And by the way, nobody gave any examples of pain or pleasure. So, I'm sure they have some, though. But working with a client right now, one of the things we're doing is we're breaking the organization apart, based on these different audiences and what their role, responsibility would be within innovation, a more formal type of role. So, we're looking at, some core skills, advanced skills, leader skills, skills for leaders, and champions of innovation skills, and then culture change skills. And so we're breaking that back. And the type of training, of course, if you have somebody that's really supposed to be a champion, the level of training that they need is going to include, facilitating sessions, putting together the innovation plans and frameworks, helping to really drive the culture. So that's a more advanced type of training than, someone who is just starting in the organization. They need some core tools and techniques, and they need some language and a general understanding of the expectation of how they are supposed to be innovative, and to understand that being innovative is part of their job. So that, it might be something that's done more in an e-learning type of way. So I think you've got to have this nice blend. It's not one size fits all training, and it's not that everybody needs the same level of abilities and skills depending on what their responsibilities are.
Thanks, Natalie. I'm going to take just a moment right here and unashamedly and blatantly plug the training that New and Improved offers to help organizations build an innovative culture. Now, what Natalie just said about the idea that one size does not fit all, they really take that into consideration when they work with leadership and staff. They tailor it to the specific needs of an organization. And what I like is that they bring structure, discipline, and balance sprinkled with just the right dash of irreverence and fun to the training that they provide. It's great stuff. Whew, thanks for that. Now, on with our show.
Right dash of irreverence. I'm picturing pepper.
That's it. A lot of pepper.
It makes people sneeze. Right dash.
Bob, you had mentioned earlier that the right accountability and metrics need to be in place in an innovative culture to be successful and to avoid risk. What are some of those things that you think ought to be measured, and how do you measure them?
Yeah, this is a fascinating one to kind of work through at the enterprise level when you're trying to really build a culture. There's these direct measures that folks will play around with, and a lot of companies actually, before we even meet them, they already have some of these direct measures in place. So, for instance, they might have a clarity about what's going on in their product pipeline, and they'll have a stage gate process where they can measure the amount of throughput at a given time, and they'll know kind of from the history of their industry, how many products or services that they're selling are in a certain place. They have that, generally around product or service, what they're offering into the world. But then, how are they measuring innovation in terms of how their core business functions are operating and how their manufacturing line is improving itself and all those kinds of things. And most aren't yet looking at that. And so we're generally seeing a movement towards, and we think it's smart, it's relatively new. Only a few cases are coming out where people have been doing this a while, but where they're beginning to hold pretty much every, I'll call it manager or business unit leader, responsible to report not only the quality of what it is they're doing that they've been doing, but also what have they improved? Where are they doing new things that are bringing new value to the organization? And if I'm one of those managers, I know that in my performance review, I'm going to be having to demonstrate that. Another thing they're measuring from a performance review point of view, it's a bit more indirect. Well, let me go to one more direct. The other direct one is people will look at the percent of revenue from products recently introduced or services recently introduced over services that have been in market for a while. And various industries are starting to settle out about what's the sweet spot for them. In toys, we'll hear as high as we want most of our revenue to come from 20% of our products, but we're going to introduce 80% new products each we're in the middle of that cycle now here in North America, the holiday season cycle. So they're playing around that ratio. Now, a more interesting one, quite frankly, to me, that I think scans across multiple industries is to take a look at what are the kind of cultural enablers going on in our organization, in any organization. And Teresa Mobley did great work around this in the development of the KEYS assessment that we use quite frequently as a kind of baseline metric, and then we review it. So every year, that organization retakes that, a sample, 10% sample of the organization retakes that, and we see how we're doing on some of these indicators that have been clearly demonstrated in good, solid, peer-reviewed research, that if you move those indicators in a positive direction, and two of them in the negative direction, or make less of two of the inhibitors, then you're going to have a more innovative company, and, oh, wait, bonus, you're going to see a lagging increase in your net asset value. So you're going to grow your company and be more innovative. So we like that. And then the final one that we're really suggesting is that HR figure out a way to understand what are the kinds of behavioral characteristics of folks that are supporting a culture of innovation, and what are the behavioral characteristics of folks that are inhibiting a culture of innovation within their interactions with each other. And of course, we want to put those things in performance appraisal. So we want to hold people accountable to those kinds of things. And so a thing like, treats new ideas well, however you're going to play with that in your thing, or is willing to work cooperatively to strengthen concepts, things like that are important to be able to watch. So those are some of the key measures that we're seeing show up and that are making a difference.
That's great, Bob. And Natalie, a question to you. Bob just addressed the things that are helpful to have in place when an innovative culture is rolling along. To get one started, the innovative culture, to get it started, does building that culture have to start at the very top of an organization, at the highest of the C-levels?
I think you need the support of the high-level C-level if you are really talking about building an innovative culture. That doesn't mean that there's not things that are happening in the middle and the front line. I think what we're seeing is there's been a lot of things that have been happening in the middle, and what organizations are seeing is without that support from the top, it is very difficult to keep the momentum going and keep the focus going on those efforts over time. So, it's one of those things that it's certainly a whole lot easier, and you can make faster progress if there is the support at the top.
Good, thanks for that. And Bob, this whole idea of risk that we talked about, of trying to get new ideas to the forefront and having the courage to do that, how does one pitch a new idea, do you think? How do you sell it within an organization?
I think this is a real key to driving innovation forward. So On one side, I want to build systems that support people doing that, creative collaboration software platforms, venture capital systems, things like that. So systems that allow, give people a fertile place to take their new thinking. But then even when they take their new thinking to that place, there have to be some improvements. So just in the last 10 days, really, I've been having this conversation a lot. Yesterday, at a technology company on the East Coast. This morning, I was grading a paper, so to speak. So last week, we were doing a training with an organization that has been involved in a good number of relatively small scale size, not the kind that make it into the Wall Street Journal, but mergers and acquisitions to grow their footprint, their company, and their product offering. And one of the things that one of the folks was really working on that came out of one of our training programs, we do real work at the training, not simulation, is he's trying to improve their M&A, the integration dynamics. It's expensive. To do that integration poorly or well can be a significant increase or decrease in cost and more rapid realization of the positive revenue potential from a merger. And so he's doing this work. And so he's got a pitch. He's got an idea. He's got a clear idea about a way that they can increase the quality and the speed of their integration. Great, interesting idea. And so what he's preparing for is a pitch to governance about moving this idea forward. So he sent me this morning, I told him he could, and he sent me the pitch, so to speak. And he's working to conform it to something he learned in training, which is this method called POINT, and he's conforming the proposal to this method, which has been researched to kind of engage people's thinking, governance thinking around this in a much more productive way. And it's not just about, get them to say yes, but to have them review it in a way that we get to yes, but they also participate in strengthening whatever it is that I plan on doing. So it's not just a binary yes/no kind of pitch idea thing. It engages people in improvement. So so that's one of our most fundamental tools here is this thing called POINT. But it's essentially this idea that causes people to look for what they like in an idea first. And if you're pitching, you've got to get people to look for what they like in what you're pitching first. And there's tricks to that, to get that. So we wrote a white paper around this a while back called Pitching Ideas. And then there's a word template, that you can use to actually write up your pitch. And so I think, and if we haven't planned to, but we can point people to that particular article that goes to it in detail. And that article has a link to get the pitch document, or you can send an email to us. But that of everything we found is the best. Now you talk even to a field force person, a salesperson, they'll tell you the same thing, that if they approach a sales interaction with this kind of thinking in their mind and this kind of a process in the way that they engage with a potential customer, even then it works well. And everything you get somebody else to do, you can think of them as your customer.
Thanks, Bob. In order to give our attendees just a chance to ask a few questions or raise any comments at this point, I'd like to turn the session over to the audience. If you want to raise your hand, we'll unmute you, or if you want to type in the chat box, that'll be great. But it's time for your questions and comments about leading innovation for results. We'd really like to hear from you.
And I saw a question came in about getting the links to the papers. We will put those up at the end and let you know how you can request that. But the person that said that, we will make sure it gets sent to you.
So any questions or comments you have, we're open for them.
It's always the toughest part of a webinar, isn't it? To pull that out. Because most of us are doing our email while we're listening to a webinar.
Oh, no, tell me that's not true.
It's funny. We do a blended learning program for one of our clients, and I'm constantly kind of challenging people to get off their email client at that particular moment so that they really can fully stay engaged in terms of it, moving it forward.
Looks like there's a question that came in.
What is that?
How do you get the most bang for your buck out of brainstorming sessions organized like IFR, Innovation for Results?
Now, when I think about that, I think about some of the impediments. So obviously, you get the most bang for your buck if you've identified the right place in the creative process that you are. A lot of people, a common mistake people make is they say, we're going to have a brainstorming session to generate ideas. Well, that's kind of a naive way to see brainstorming. Sometimes you have a brainstorming session to generate problems. And then you narrow those problems down to the key ones that you're going to solve at that particular time, and that's called strategy. Sometimes you're brainstorming potential objections to a solution that you've developed. And then you narrow those potential objections down to the key objections you think you need to solve to do that. So it's not just about ideas. So one is doing good assessment about where in the creative process you need to be and having some rigor in the language around that. Second,
other things, Bob, if I could just pitch in on that is,
yeah.
Sometimes people are just uncomfortable with that process or don't think themselves to be highly creative. Yet with a few well-designed tools, they can produce phenomenal ideas when needed. So I think having the proper tools available at the proper time, as you suggest, is also a very useful thing for successful brainstorming.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with what you both have said, and a story that comes into my mind is Edward de Bono tells a story about he's talking about openness to being willing to be creative, and he said, if you have somebody and they're sitting in a chair and they're all tied up, bound, their hands are bound, and you say to the person, play the violin. Well, they can't play the violin because they're all tied up. But then you cut the ropes and they're free, so they're open, and then you say that person is a violinist. It's not true because they don't have the skills developed to play the violin. But being open and having their hands unbound is the first step, and I think that's part of the brainstorming process where people maybe don't get their bang for the buck is, one, they might be all in different focus areas, so they're trying to brainstorm around different things, or they don't have some tools and techniques to get them out of their normal everyday thinking around the problem.
Yeah, I think Kathy has a question as well, Natalie. Could you read that one, please?
Yes, let's see. Let me find Kathy. Kathy says, is there a workable process for effectively brainstorming via virtual sessions?
There are a bunch of them. There are a number of software vendors out in the world that build these things. That it's unfortunate they tend to want to call them idea management systems. I think that they've evolved to be much more than that, and I don't know why their industry hasn't stopped calling it that. They're creative collaboration platforms. So you can go the big picture perspective and do that. But you'll see at New and Improved, we'll oftentimes open up a Google document. We'll all be on the phone together, and we'll open up a Google document that we can all type in at the same time. And we'll do a brainstorm that way. Or there's a tool called Brain Writing that it's a divergent technique. You can read about it on our website, and it's in one of our tool cards that people get all the time. And so what we'll do is we'll build a spreadsheet that gets passed around in a particular way, and people contribute to that spreadsheet. So you don't have to be in the same place, nor do you even have to be synchronous. So with a Google document brainstorm, we're all doing it synchronously, but with a spreadsheet, we're doing asynchronously. So that's kind of a neat thing. A woman at the training last week was talking about her company uses a product that they purchased from one of these larger vendors that build these collaborative software platforms. And for fun, what she does in the evenings when she's traveling, she's in marketing, has to travel a good bit, she sits in her hotel room, she gets herself a glass of wine, she opens up the client, and she goes into her company and she looks at their idea divergence system, and she looks for challenges that people are trying to solve because they populate it with challenges, and she just brainstorms and comments on challenges, much like somebody might get into a LinkedIn conversation and comment on them. She just does it for fun. And you know, that's her way to relax in the evening and while she's on the road with a glass of wine. And so, you know, there are a lot of ways to do that. The limitation really is our creativity and then what the support systems are behind what it is that, you know, our organization provides to us. Go low tech or high tech, but it's all there.
You know, Bob and Natalie, I think our guests deserve to hear about the products that you are offering for them. And so if anyone would like a free download of how to pitch an idea as well as the 12 drivers of innovation, what I'll invite you to do is to email Natalie at njenkins@newandimprove.com, and she can tell you exactly how to get those particular documents. And if you're just not in the mood to do any more emails since you were doing it for the last hour, you can call Natalie. You can call Natalie directly, and I'll give you her number right here. It's 515-865-1279. Operators are standing by. If you are dialing from out of the United States, please put a 1 in front of the number. And lastly, as the moderator, Chuck Dimer, I'd like to say thank you so very, very much for being here today. I really appreciated it. I appreciated the comments and questions that you provided, and thank you mostly for your attention. Bob and Natalie, you're a joy to work with. Thank you so much.
Thanks for taking this on,
Thanks,
Chuck.
everyone.
Yep. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Have a great day.